The last day of January today. I'm not stepping much more than this away from the house. Yet I can still find something quite easily to show you. And it's a species that's on everybody's houses, even the latest new builds. It's a spider. Don't all switch off now. The spider in question is an orb-weaver, and its common name is sometimes given as the missing sector orb-weaver. The scientific name is Zygiella x-notata. What the x-notata bit is, I don't know, but it might well have something to do with the fact that this spider doesn't make a complete orb web. Your typical orb webs start off with a basic framework, and then there's a central bit and various spoke-like threads. Those threads are then filled in as the spider goes round and round in a spiral. But Zygiella x-notata misses one section out between two of the spokes. Why it does it? Nobody knows. Perhaps they could call it the half a job spider. Now, as I sit here at the end of January, I've gone round the windows on the kitchen, bathroom and this back living room, and there are numerous old webs of Zygiella x-notata, and only two are presently occupied, and I'll dig one out so you can have a look at it. It's a very common spider, as I mentioned, and at the same time it is incredibly persecuted. It's needlessly persecuted, and that's thanks purely down to people's unwarranted fear of the noble false widow. The press have an awful lot to answer for. As a consequence of people's fear that they have noble false widows around the windows, which they don't, because false widows are very unlikely to build a web around your typical window or door frame. They may well build a web, as this one does often under here. One will take up residence underneath a windowsill, and where there is a decent retreat. Bear in mind the false widows are large spiders. They're not the tiny spiders that people claim to have bitten them. So here's your typical Zygiella x-notata habitat and appearance on the web is in this corner of the window frame. You can't see it in this shot, but as you can see in the photo, the spider is just in the centre, just under that lip of the upper window frame. To the right are what look like two old egg sacs, where the spiderlings have emerged and dispersed. And this is female, and this is your typical appearance of Zygiella x-notata. The spider is sat in a light silk tubular retreat, and that's where it sits, whether the weather is 30 degrees centigrade or -10. Amazingly hardy, these spiders. And if you want your invertebrate fixed during the winter months and you think there's nothing around, have a look on your window frames, because you'll have these little things, cracking spiders. And here it is. This is not completely full grown. It does get a little bit bigger than this, but you can see, compared to my mucky, grubby hand, the general size. This one's quite a brownish one. I think it's either ready for popping its clogs after making several egg sacs during the course of last year. They are fairly well marked, and the markings, yes, can be very similar to subadult false widows, but when false widows grow, they become almost completely plain, dark brown to almost black with very few markings on, and much bigger than these. None are going to kill you. None will do you any harm. Not even the notorious noble false widow. Ignore the crap that the papers say about that. Meanwhile, Steodota nobilis continues to be persecuted all the time. Let's hope one day arachnologists are able to educate the public and the public's fear is lessened. This little chap, Zygiella x-notata, though, is completely harmless. Lovely little spider. When you disturb these, they tend to sit with the leg on the tripwire leading to the centre of the orb web, and they'll sit in the retreat with the legs just poking out of the retreat. And if you touch the retreat often, their first defence is to retreat back into that retreat and go to the back of it, but it's only a small retreat, and so if you just press lightly on the end, the next thing, or the next form of defence that this spider utilises is to run out of the retreat and drop down on a strand of silk. Later it will climb back up into its retreat and back to its web. So there we are. Little video. Didn't even have to leave home to make it. Of course, Zygiella x-notata is just one of numerous spiders that can be found either on your house walls or in your garden. The spiders that you get in your garden are really quite easy to identify. Just do a bit of research and use reliable sources. Not everything is impossible to identify. Although spider identification can be extremely difficult and will require close-up examination of a specimen, there are still many species which can be safely identified via a good book or photographs on the internet. And one of the spiders which is a common sight in spring, and on the first warm day, probably in February, that we get, may well be trundling around on these walls. And that's the zebra jumping spider, Zoeticus senicus, which is everyone's favourite spider. If it isn't, it should be.